Welcome to this very special edition of the Author's Voice with KAJ, a show where we explore the stories behind the stories. We dive into the worlds created by authors, discover their inspirations, and ensure that you, our audience, walk away enriched and inspired. And as you can see in the other screen, today we have with us Brian Gorman, writer, author, coach. He is coaching leaders for the future of work and all that. So we'll talk. He's also a podcast host. Welcome to the show, Brian.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form, Brian. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people will benefit from what we learn from you about your writing, especially in that background. Also learn about what you. And so that in that case, you are our featured author for today, Brian Gorman, with us here. So, Brian, before we move forward with your writing about the hero and the Sherpa and other things that you've written, let's understand a bit more about you, what you do in that backdrop, so that the audience understands who they are listening to.
My history, if you will, for several decades was in the realm of organizational change management. And actually, in the second half of the 80s, I trained with Daryl Connor, who's recognized as one of the founders of the profession. And so both from an internal perspective and as an external consultant, I worked in that field for many years. More recently, I trained as a coach and have become a leadership and transformation coach. But what's really important, I think, of everything that I have learned along the way, and it is the focus of the hero and the Sherpa, is organizations don't change. People change. And so whether I'm going through a change personally, or whether I am guiding a global organization going through a change, it's the same journey, just at a different scale.
Right, right. And that is where, it brings me to your writing, The Hero and the Sherpa. Uh, what do you want to convey through this chapter? It was released by Springer International and then it came into a digital form and all. So I want to understand for the audience, what is this whole hero and the Sherpa all about? What is it that you want to tell them through this?
The hero and the Sherpa is really a compilation of everything I have learned over my career about how we move through change. And what I often say is Joseph Campbell got it right. Joseph Campbell was a mid-20th century mythologist and psychologist. And one area of his research was, can we find a common pattern, for example, in creation myths across time and across cultures? Can we find a common pattern of in coming of age myths across cultures and across time? And what he discovered is there's one pattern behind all of myth, and he called it the hero's journey. And he spoke about it, wrote about it in many ways. The Hero with 1,000 Faces is probably his most well-known book on the topic. My chapter, The Hero and the Sherpa, is my experience with the lessons I've learned about what that hero's journey is. And so it follows a very similar pattern to what Campbell talks about, but it brings in lessons on how to move through that journey.
Right. Can you elaborate on that? Who is the hero here? Who is the Sherpa here? And what is it that the audience can learn? Who is this whole chapter that you have written? And I like the title of this, The Hero and the Sherpa. Who is this for?
The hero is the person who takes on the change, the person who seeks a new profession, or the person who is entering a new phase in their life with intention and with some form of change in mind. The Sherpa is the person who guides them. So the chapter was really written for those who fill a Sherpa role, if you will, for coaches, for therapists, for counselors, for advisors. But the hero reading the chapter will also learn a lot.
Right, right. And so in today's term, if you look at it from that, in terms of leaders, if we can look at from that point in learning from you, how can leaders genuinely, connect with their teams today in that sense?
The first and most important thing, I think, if you don't start off right, it's hard to get back on track. And most leaders, unfortunately, don't start off right. They say, we're going to, this is our new strategy, and this is how much more market share we're going to have, how much more value we're going to have for our shareholders, and all of that kind of stuff. And I don't even think I know any leaders who get up excited about undertaking that kind of change. We need to begin our journeys with a story not about the future, but a story from the future. And so the first section of this chapter talks about just that, creating that story from the future. And the reason for this is neuroscience based. And it's, it was, first of all, outside the realm of Joseph Campbell's studies, but knowledge that we didn't have 50, 60, 70 years ago. In our hearts, we have the same motor neurons and sensory neurons as in our heads, the same electrochemical activity. In our guts, we have about as many neurons as a cat's brain. And whether you're someone who calls these the heart and gut brains, or heart and gut neural networks, neural clusters, neuroscientists agree they're there, and about 90% of the communication is upward. So the story from the future is a story that is a head, heart, gut story, not just a head story. And why that is important is our brains can't tell the difference between story and reality. So if my story is, I can't believe we did this. We sold 2 houses in the middle of the housing crisis. We dispensed of all our furniture. We learned Spanish. We moved to Costa Rica. We woke up this morning with the ocean breeze blowing through our window, the chatter of Spanish in the street. We did it. You're building new neural networks in your brain with that kind of story. And so when you run into those inevitable obstacles, if the story was, in the next 5 years, we're going to sell 2 houses, even though we're in the middle of a housing crisis, we're going to have to learn Spanish, we're going to have to dispense with all our property. The likelihood is, instead of moving to Costa Rica, we're going to move to Florida. But that story from the future creates new neural networks. It helps you overcome those inevitable obstacles. So that's the first step. And whether, again, and I have seen this done at the personal level, but I've also seen this done at the regional, national, international, and even global organization level.
Right, Brian. You said, in the beginning that organizations don't change, if I heard you correctly. That if organizations don't change, then who changes? Is it only the time that changes? Is it the people that changes? Is it the CEO? Help us understand in that.
It's the people. You can build a new building. You can create a new product. You can build a skyscraper or manufacturing facility. But if the people behave the same way the people behaved before, nothing changes. It's all about people. Why most organizational changes fail has nothing to do with the strategy. It has to do with how people execute it.
Right, right. Then whose job is to, execute this change, especially in today's time when people are questioning about leadership capabilities. People are talking about, uh, people could not change during COVID. There were a lot of the remnants of those problems are still very much to see whether nobody is able to decide work from home, hybrid, whether, and there's this coffee badge and all these new terms have, coffee badging and all those things have come up. So I want to understand that. But leaders also, can we just blame them? Because leaders also have to look at every aspect. Otherwise, they may also become part of this whole cancel culture that sometimes pervades.
I think there is, again, one of the places where we so often make a mistake because we equate leadership with position and title. And some of the most powerful leaders in organizations have neither. But they're the people that others listen to. They're the people that others go to find out what's going on. And so if you're looking to make change in an organization, yes, you need the people with the authority to make the decision to make the investment. But you also need those who are the influencers in the organization on board. And so that calls for a whole different approach to how we execute change at scale. And it's possible. It's possible. There's a great book. It has been out for several years now called Influencer, The New Science of Change. And it gives incredible examples of how people with no direct authority have influenced change at huge scale.
Right, right. So, and you talk about, you have a deep understanding of neuroscience and psychology of people moving through change. What about leaders? They may not be as wise or as deep understanding about these things. Do they have to learn about neuroscience? Do they have to learn about psychology? Without doing this, how can they still implement the things that you have written in this, in the hero and the Sherpa?
You don't have to learn the neuroscience. You do need to trust those who are available to advise you, who have that wisdom. Again, as the leader, you may be the hero, but on these difficult change journeys, we all need Sherpas.
Right, right. And that is where your role comes in. Means how do you propose that you help these leaders? Would you because change is constant, a lot of things are changing. They will say, Brian, how will you bring in change or the type of things that we need when you are coming in only for a short period of time? We are not able to understand what needs to be changed, what does not need to be changed. How will you understand it from the outside?
One of the big mistakes that most organizations make is not filtering what to change and what to hold steady. Again, just a little bit of psychology, and I talk about this in the chapter as well. If you think back to the time of COVID, how often did you hear everything's changing? It wasn't. Yes, some very significant things in our lives changed, and changed dramatically and changed quickly. But there were other things that are anchors in our lives that didn't change at all. And so what changes are essential is really the first question I would ask any leader. And let's let go of those that are good ideas. And let's certainly let go of those that are bad ideas. And focus on those changes that are essential. You know, I'm sure your listeners have heard of the term VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, etc. The pace of change is getting more and more rapid. The volume of change is getting more and more rapid. The complexity of change is getting more and more significant. And so let's filter out all of those changes we don't need to make, so we have the capacity for the changes that are essential. That's where I would start.
Right, right. You talk about, storytelling be a powerful tool in any organizational change. What is storytelling here? Storytelling can also be falsehood. I want to understand the storytelling part here.
Again, there's some neuroscience here. We had story before we had language. We drew story in the dirt, painted on hides and cave walls and so forth. While we act as if our brains are supercomputers, they aren't. They're story processors. The other piece I want to sort of preface this with is anybody who says they're not a good storyteller, they're wrong. We all tell ourselves stories all the time, and they become our truths, which become the guides for how we live our life. So story, and go back to the story from the future. Story is what engages us. Story is what excites us. Story is what our minds are best at processing. I'm coaching some gentlemen, C-suite gentlemen in New York City. And they just did a live video town hall to their organization. And each of them told the story of how they moved through their career. And from that story, they were able to draw lessons for those who work in the organization. So they could have just sat there and said, if you want to really succeed in your career, seek out the difficult challenges. Well, that sounds good, right? But when I get myself in that first difficult situation, I may think twice about doing it again. But they told their story of how they had ended up helping to disassemble the remains of the World Trade Center. And what they learned from that and how that changed the path of their career. That's a whole lot more powerful than saying, put yourself in difficult situations to advance your career.
Right. And in talking of change, you said it's people's change. Who has the biggest difficulty to change? Is it the employees or the leaders? How does that work?
I'm going to have to answer yes. Sometimes it's the leaders. Sometimes it's the leader who says, you all have to change, I don't. Sometimes it's the employees. I'll give you one example from my early days in a consulting company. One day they moved the location of the coffee machine. For some of us, it was oh, I have to turn left when I walk into the kitchen instead of turn right now. Others were talking about it 3 months later. Change is a very personal thing. And how difficult it is a very personal thing. Whether it's positive or negative is a very personal thing. Working from home for some people was a positive. Working from home for others was a negative. All change is personal.
Right. If all change is personal, why then leaders are not able to, implement it in that same way? Like every illness will need a different sort of a personalized medicine, and according to that, that prescription has to be there. So change, why is it that they just push through that change rather than implementing it so that others are able to understand it? Have you dealt with that in the hero and the Sherpa?
Again, this particular chapter is written at the individual level, and I have seen it executed at scale. It really depends on the leader's understanding of the fact that change happens through the people. And again, they don't need to understand the psychology. They don't need to understand the neuroscience. They do have to accept that because I say it doesn't mean it happens. Because I say it doesn't mean people will do it. Because I say it doesn't mean people buy into it.
Right, right. Let's understand now about your, 24 articles that you have written for the Forbes Business Coaches Council. And again, this focus on the role of leaders as they address various aspects of change. What are these articles all about? What is it that our audience can learn from these Forbes Coaches Council articles?
Each article is a quick read. They're all 1,000 words or less, so maybe 5 minutes at most. I was just looking at them a few weeks ago and I was shocked. There's one article on the 3 brains that has over 25,000 views. Each of them is just a mini lesson for leaders about some aspect of leadership. So, how do I change a bad habit as a leader? How do I pay attention to my anchors and the anchors of the people in the organization when we're going through big change? It's just 24 of those kinds of mini lessons.
Right, right, Brian. And so, coming back to the hero and the Sherpa, uh, did you face any challenges in terms of putting across your views in writing that particular chapter? Because it is all about change, and change is very personal, catering to something, which is very personal to so many other leaders and employees.
From a writing perspective, I am very fortunate that I've been doing it for a long time. I've had some good coaches and mentors and editors along the way. So that was not in and of itself challenging. What was challenging was to take what sounds like 2 contradictory realities and show that they're both true. All change is personal, and we all move through it on a similar path. And so bringing those two ideas together so that they are um, believable was the real challenge.
Right, right, Brian. And that is where you see I brought that up, the hero and the Sherpa on the screen for the audience, and that is where they can find it. It's there on Springer Nature. The link is there. We'll also introduce it, put it out in that show note description. One last question that I
One
want to,
real
yeah,
real quickly, it was actually released in the digital version of that book. It is available in digital and print in the 2023 Handbook of Personal, Educational, and Organizational Transformation.
right. So this one is where this one, which one I picked it up? Where from? By is this the one you are talking about?
No, no.
Okay, so there will be a much more latest version,
Okay.
isn't it?
This is the original version,
This is
which
the
came out
original.
in 20. The print came out in 2019. They added, or 2018. They added the chapter in 2019.
Right, right. So one last thing is the key messages, for leaders, for the audience that they can get from the hero and the Sherpa. What is it? What are the key takeaways for them from it?
I'm no longer sure whether I'm quoting or paraphrasing Joseph Campbell here. While we approach each change as if it's unique and unpredictable, it's not. We take the same change journey over and over and over again. So learn the basics of that journey. Learn the basics of that journey. And then bring in a trusted advisor who can help you guide your organization through it.
Wonderful, wonderful. There is much to learn from you, and this is just some of the things that you have written. Your journey continues, and there will be a lot of people who want to connect with you and want to learn more about you. All the other details I'll put in the YouTube description for connecting with you. What is the best way for the readers, for the audience to do so?
Probably easiest is by email. And my email is Brian, Brian, at TransformingLives.Coach. If you go to my website, TransformingLives.Coach, there's a link there, along with a phone number if you find it easier or more comfortable to pick up the phone.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the Author's Voice with KAJ. Thank you so much indeed. Right.